Hey guys, welcome back to the Casual NBA Fanatic podcast. I hope the week has been a busy, productive, and eventful week for all of you guys. As this off-season has been, we've already hit the summer league time with the draft and the bulk of free agency out of the way already. And this is all just less than a month removed from the NBA Finals. We know how stacked the NBA calendar can be. Sometimes, though, it does catch us by surprise, and so with that, we are reviewing the second part of our free agency rankings, grading our three most underwhelming franchises of the free agency period. Teams, in my opinion, that failed to maintain their positioning as a favourite and a contender in their respective conferences through either, stagnancy or an inability to make sufficient or substantial moves on the margins or in their star power, and that to me, puts them in a worsened position as we look towards 2026. This by no means is to say that the offseason for these teams was a failure. There is still a ton of work to be done for each of these three franchises, but as of now, as we've passed the bulk of the free agency opportunities available, these three teams to me simply disappointed the most, and I view them as lower ranked threats in the NBA due to this. We're going to start with the Los Angeles Lakers. I think this team seemingly failed to cover up all of their athletic holes, the main predominant reason for their lack of matchup resilience last year, and something that I thought brutally caught them out versus Minnesota. And not just that, they didn't bring in much playable athleticism either. They lost one of their best two-way wings in Dorian Finney-Smith, who was extremely crucial for them as a wing stopper and point of attack piece. And they didn't really replace him with an experienced veteran. They brought in Jake LaRavia to kind of compensate for that. And to me, bringing in a guy like LaRavia is fine. Obviously, though, you lose a lot of the higher-end role player experience like what Dorian Finney-Smith could bring you with the inexperience of Jake LaRavia. The bright spot, though, for this move is that I believe that there is real room for Jake LaRavia to produce in this lineup. He's got an extremely strong frame. He's a good athlete, 6'7", 235 pounds. He's got real physical tools and a non-stop motor that always competes continually, which is a bright spot for what this team needs. And adding a piece like Jake LaRavia, a guy who shot 44% on above the break threes and 36% on pull-up threes, though despite low volume, that does signal maturity and understanding of his level in the league. He's a very mature role player prospect and a guy who has more off-the-dribble tools than a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith had, though they won't be needed and they'll be made pretty redundant with the shot creators that LA have already. But LaRavia also may be able to contribute better as an off-ball mover. He's a better connective feeder in what they will need to be a power-jacked offense. So for the ceiling that he brings for the future in LA will be a little bit substantially greater than what Dorian Finney-Smith gave you, though the Lakers need to win next season while they still have LeBron. And I think the downgrade from Dorian Finney-Smith to Jake LaRavia was pretty substantial on the margins for LA. However, for me, the underwhelming aspect comes from the lack of talent influx that the Lakers had in this free agency period. The role player margins weren't filled, and this flowed into their lack of center depth that they did not attain. They did get DeAndre Ayton. Yes, they got him for very cheap. He's a guy who will be able to come in and produce as that offensively skilled big, and a guy that does bring a bit more spacing juice, than most pocket passing receiving bigs do in the league. And he's got that intermediate range in his arsenal. The offense isn't much of the question here. The offense seems pretty exceptional as a fit, to be honest, at the moment. There's too much talent to not deliver excellent results as well as a matchup resilient offense for LA now bringing in DeAndre Ayton. But DeAndre doesn't fill in anything as that defensive anchor that they did need. And he won't be able to fill this, and LA wasn't able to fill this even behind DeAndre Ayton. And this really ultimately is what DeAndre Ayton's biggest limitation is as a starting center. He lacks the cognitive side of things on the defensive end. Overall, he's pretty atrocious. And when it comes to the requisite consistency and the motor needed to satisfy a starting anchor role, especially when looking at the situation that he's in, he's got 4 extremely average to below average defensive athletes, guys who express their energy mainly in their offensive impact on the floor. And though there is potential for Ayton, he's got mobile footwork, he's got a capable 7'5" wingspan, he's got bulky strength to be able to absorb contact to a decent degree. Although he has these tools, he He just simply doesn't apply himself to be able to captain a defensive disaster like what we saw in LA last season. He's not the type of guy that will scrape for effort requiring rebounds. He's a guy that casually jogs back on defense very, very frequently, and that gives up a ton of unnecessary cross matches in transition, and we know how important it is to be a pristine transition offense and defense in the league to be able to compete at the highest level now. He's overall pretty raw with his timing as a drop coverage anchor, and he isn't the most polished with his footwork structure, and he gives up a lot of lanes and angles quite easily with his narrow feet. And despite not being in a winning situation, to me it defines a lot of character if you keep the competitive fire lit, even when it does seem pointless when you aren't stacking up wins as a team. And we're not looking for someone to satisfy this specific role at a satisfactory level. We're looking for a higher order rim protector. And to me, DeAndre Ayton's habits and energy expenditure on the defensive end is far from desired for LA. Back to the offense though, for me, I do believe that he does fight for himself very well. He tries to free himself up and get quality positioning off the roll and against zones, trying to attack through the middle with that mid-range jumper that he has in his arsenal. But the aggregate impact isn't starting worthy for this team and what they do need. And the fact that they missed out on Mark Williams, who was already a mediocre defensive prospect as it is, but they've had to settle lower, which makes this a lot harder to swallow for LA. And it'll be interesting to see what JJ Redick can do to engage DeAndre Ayton with the body composition that he does have. But to me, it seems like a task beyond repairing across just a few months, as the Lakers need to be aggressive competitors from the get-go of the season. They need to establish their habits and their chemistry as every champion does at the start of the season, and it's going to take a lot of work from the coaching staff to engage DeAndre Ayton into the role that they need him to fulfill. On the other hand, the Lakers did get LeBron James back on their player option, which was expected for them, but they haven't made themselves credible enough to win a title next year, in my opinion. Their current roster construction doesn't satisfy the needs of two-way impact, which is required in today's NBA. I would have thought dealing away Austin Reeves would have been a quality move to make to be able to satisfy the big man position, and I thought that was a core need to also reduce the roster redundancy as well amongst the stars to a degree. But the Lakers have a fair belief in Austin, so I'm not going to hold them back on this. Austin's talent as a physical shot creator is extremely fair to believe in that, and he's shown enough ability to play off ball as a smart, high IQ cutter and spot up player. But this ultimately does limit their floor once again heading into next season when you don't have your center position fulfilled, which is one of the most impactful positions in the game when you talk about the defensive value that a big does bring on the floor. But besides that, the Lakers, on a positive, should be relatively credited, and they got possibly 2 starting-worthy players just with their mid-level exception, which is pretty impressive. Overall, though, to me, the mediocre moves made relative to the stakes of this free agency period for the Lakers and how crucial it was to nail this, the Lakers, to me, get a D+ from the free agency alone. Moving on to my second team, I have the Golden State Warriors, a team that looked primed for a deep playoff run prior to Steph's injury in the second round just last year. And the Warriors have failed so far in this offseason, to me, to bring in sufficient levels of scoring power, something that was proven that the Warriors still lacked even after the Jimmy Butler trade, as we saw Jimmy's inability to provide that aggressive mismatch attacking that he once could years back, and something that did hold them back, especially when Steph was injured. And it seems as if when Steph went down, the Warriors' season was completely over, and there was no hope in sight of them overcoming the Minnesota Timberwolves. Big portion of that is that you don't have a quality secondary or tertiary scoring option anymore. In saying this, though, this has no knock on the Jimmy Butler trade. Jimmy has been absolutely exceptional for Golden State, and the trade has and will continue to pay dividends as he contributes to winning on so many different margins, and that's really the star that he is. He just contributes with such a diversified impact in the Warriors system. But bringing in some more offensive firepower was the next move for the Warriors to make, to not just make them brief contenders, but serious, undoubted championship contenders. And so far, they haven't really been able to do so with the stagnancy with their stagnancy in the free agency market. The Kuminga mystery as well is something that still lurks. Hopefully, a deal is on the short horizon, which to be honest, has been pretty long overdue. The Warriors' dreams to get back another viable offensive scoring punch may not eventuate. Jonathan Kuminga has relatively average value when comparing him to the talent that he posed years back. And even after some bright playoff moments that he had after Steph got injured, Kuminga still presents as a young guy who really needs an entire franchise's patience to blossom into a talent. The talent that he does have, but that is a hefty process for both a front office and a fan base to go through. Especially as we also haven't seen enough from Jonathan Kuminga to believe in a top 25 ceiling in this league. Like, that's a massive, massive expectation to put on a guy. And with injuries and an inability to effectively contribute to the contending basketball that the Warriors were playing in the second half of the season, that doesn't really give him a strong case. And it'll be interesting to see what the market really was. But optimism of making a substantial upgrade just for next season isn't really super high though. We will see though, I think the rumors were that he will be traded to the Sacramento Kings, so it really depends on what type of talent they can get back in that trade. That will determine if they had a successful free agency period worth of trade deals and signings overall. They did lose Kevon Looney. To me, that was fine, especially if the Warriors can get Al Horford in this market, a guy that gives them a more skilled and versatile look on both ends of the floor. A signing that would give them one of the smartest defensive front lines of all time between Al Horford, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond. But betting on your big move of the offseason to be a 39-year-old center who relies heavily on his mobility doesn't really boost your championship odds to the level it may need to for a team that is already very old at its core. On another note, there is more wriggle room in the financials that the Warriors need to create and that needs to be done to be able to allow them to still look towards the remaining free agency pool, which does look relatively appealing still, but there are still massive question marks as to how much these can really swing the Warriors' odds to compete against the beasts of the West, which they have already definitely fell behind with the free agency greatness of the Houston Rockets and the Denver Nuggets. Last season, I would have had the Warriors, I think, as my second favorite to come out of the West behind OKC. Now you'd say the Rockets and Nuggets, purely on paper and based off last season's results, leapfrog the Warriors and what they can do next year. And I'm not sure if bare rotation pieces can really change things here, especially for the fact that Denver and Houston have boosted their star power in different ways as well, something that Golden State probably won't be able to do at this point. This pick as the Warriors as losers of free agency may be jumping the gun, but I don't see an avenue that the Warriors, strictly within this free agency period, can retain their positioning amongst the favorites in the West, which was the priority considering next season is the last year to win in the Steph Curry era. The Warriors, to me, for this offseason so far get a C- because they still have time to round the roster, which they should, but in my opinion, they fell in comparison to their conference rivals, and ultimately, whatever they do on the margins from now on won't let them leapfrog back to their second in the West positioning that I had them at. But they are certainly not as bad as my third team in this tier, which are the Milwaukee Bucks, which is not a surprise to anyone at all. The Milwaukee Bucks are certainly in an absolute hole at the moment, with only really one bright spot, being that they still have a top 3 megastar who is seemingly satisfied and doesn't yet want to leave. And the obvious 2 deals that were made that really mark what Milwaukee has done in what has been a very busy offseason for them were stretching Damian Lillard's remaining contract and buying him out to sign Miles Turner to a hefty deal when considering the money on top of his 4-year, $107 million that does come from Damian Lillard's stretched contract, which makes signing Miles Turner nearly $45 million a year, effectively for a guy who is a high-quality starting center, but not a guy who is capable of true star impact, and a guy that really only matches the impact that you got from Brook Lopez from a few years back, and also someone who the Bucks also lost in free agency after a drastic athletic decline, which I don't think will really hold the Bucks back for that move specifically, but bringing in Miles Turner on that much money is a very, very big obligation to have to pay for a 4-year deal. The Bucks are effectively banking on Miles Turner and Giannis to force them into the playoffs as their pitched star duo to the fan base. And to me, it's a pretty woeful predicament overall. I'd rather see them deal Giannis for the benefit of both parties, you know. Dealing Giannis would mean that the Bucks would be able to gain a treasure chest of draft capital and youthful talent as well. But obviously, I understand when you have arguably your most iconic franchise star, and when considering the legacy and longevity of Giannis's Milwaukee tenure, you want to keep him around for as long as possible for the fan base. But for me, this jeopardizes their future to a great extent. The Bucks also sent Pat Connaughton to the Hornets for Vasilije Micic to dump off more salary, but this costed them 2 more second-round picks, which become harder and harder to spare each time. On the other end, they did retain quite a few role players, guys that were unrestricted free agents. They did get back Gary Trent Jr., they did get back Jericho Sims, Kevin Porter Jr., and Bobby Portis. Guys that give them at least a basic role player foundation to be able to surround that twin tower duo that they now have. And they also picked up Gary Harris as well, which does give them another look as a cheap athletic 3-and-D archetype. But all in all, it seems pretty dim in Milwaukee at the moment. There's really no direction to a title in sight. And it looks like a team who looks as if they are happy to sit in mediocrity for next season, with the belief that they may be able to somehow come through the weak East next season through Giannis Antetokounmpo's greatness. But they lack basically everything but physicality on their roster to win a title next season. And with the lineup of Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent, Kyle Kuzma, Giannis, and Miles Turner, that simply isn't enough to win a title. And for coming out of this free agency period, I gave them a D for selecting the wrong route to keep and maintain Giannis with a satisfactory roster at best, limiting their future to a very substantial degree. And finishing off with them, those were my 3 teams. You know, teams that I thought have been disappointing given the opportunities and the stakes of having a crucially beneficial free agency period. Teams who do view themselves as win-now contenders, but teams that I don't think capitalized enough to be able to make that a credible belief. I just believe that these teams didn't do enough compared to their conference rivals. And for that, I think they do lose their positioning quite substantially as contenders to start next season. But I do want to make it clear though, I do think there is still a ton of work to do and a ton to accomplish. And much of that starts from training camp and onwards. And these moves by no means dictate how much growth these teams will have across the next 10 to 12 months. These are professional organizations with real plans that they aim to execute. And free agency is only one aspect of the 12-month journey of the NBA. Thanks for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and let me know who you guys thought were either bigger losers or who you thought I was overcritical of. Hit up the Instagram page as well, Casual NBA Fanatic, and let me know your guys' thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next one.